Hi guys! So I am here finally to do the video that you've seen every single other booktuber in your subscription feed do in the past few weeks, which is of course the mid-year book freakout tag. I wasn't sure if I was going to film this at first, but I've been loving watching everybody else's that it's made me more and more inclined to want to answer the questions myself, so hopefully some of you will enjoy this, even though I feel like I'm a little bit behind other people, and at the same time at the right point in the year because June is only just coming to an end. It's like the 24th today, so I will be chatting to you about all the books that I've sort of read so far and answering the questions on what I thought of them, and also some of the stuff I'm looking forward to coming out in the second half of the year. I will, however, also be uploading a video in around a week's time, which is my top 10 books of 2020 so far, so I will go into more detail about all the books I love the most in that video. This tag was created by Errol Grey Books, and I will link her channel and the original questions in her video down below in the description box, so do go check her out. And with that being said, let's crack on with question one. Now question one is the reason I just mentioned I would be uploading a top 10 video soon, because it's what is the best book you've read so far this year. And given that I've already read 73 books this year, somehow I have no idea because my Goodreads goal was 52 and I've obviously already well surpassed that. It's very difficult to pick one favourite. However, I am just going to go for it. I am going to go with Inside This Place, Not Of It. This is actually a non-fiction book that I read right at the beginning of the year in January, which feels like a million years ago, not just half a year. And it's a collection of lots of different women's voices who have been incarcerated. So some of the women that you hear from in this book are currently in prison, some have previously been in prison, and we learn about their individual experiences, their backgrounds, what brought them to the prison system, specifically in the US, and how they experienced the prison system once they were within it. And I'm sure a lot of you are becoming more and more aware, if you weren't already, of the sort of injustices within the US legal system and justice system and incarceration system, the sort of human rights violations that go on within prisons. And a lot of what I've read in the past has very much focused on men's prisons, so this book was really enlightening when obviously it came to women's prisons. For me, it was a book that I genuinely cried at. I think actually that might be a question later on in this tag that I might have to use this book for again. I'm not sure what else I cried at. But it wasn't just about the emotions it evoked in me, it was also incredibly educational, and it was published by one of my favourite non-fiction publishers who are Verso, and I kind of always trust what they release. So I like to keep an eye on what they have coming out, and this was one that really intrigued me and lived up to all of my expectations. 5 out of 5 stars. Have recommended it to a ton of people since. My friend Laura and I even picked it as our book club read for the Feminist Orchestra in the beginning of this year, and I'm just like continually trying to encourage more people to read it because I think it's such an important story. The women that voice their experiences within this collection shared those stories orally, so it's been collected orally and then transcribed for the physical book, and it just is so personal and so emotional and educational and important that, again, I would highly recommend it. The next question is more specific, and that is, what is the best sequel that you've read in 2020? Now this is tricky actually, because I've read quite a few good sequels, especially when it comes to series that I've been reading back to back. But I specifically want to highlight here a series that I have been talking about a lot in 2020, and that's the Giant Days comic book series. Now the reason I want to highlight this as best sequel is because I think I only gave volume 1 3 stars. I read the first volume of this contemporary comic book series that follows 3 young women who have just started attending university in Britain, and then we follow them over the next 3 years of their degrees. And I thought it was cute and fun and, yeah, light-hearted reading that just kind of provided a distraction for a couple of hours when I got the first volume out of the library, so I thought, hey, yeah, I'll carry on with it. But the more I read this series, the more I fell in love with it. I think because it is about a group of friends at university and you're following their university experience, you feel so much more connected to them as the volumes go on, and I just absolutely love their story. It's light and comical, but also heartwarming and absorbing, and I've just enjoyed every step of the journey that it's taken me on. I haven't quite finished. I've got a couple of volumes left because I'm a little bit nervous of finishing. I've enjoyed it so much that I like knowing there's still a couple of volumes there for me, but I have no doubt I'll do that in the next month or so, and I just feel like it's so appropriate for this question because it's a series I didn't necessarily expect to love as much, but the more I read of, the more sequels I consumed, the more it meant to me, and now has sort of become one of my favourite comic book series. Question number 3 is, what is a 2020 new release that you haven't read yet but want to? Now there's actually tons of books that I could provide as an answer for this question, like so many. I could just go upstairs and raid my bookcases, and I know there's a bunch there, but if I'm going to pick one, I think it would be The Unspoken Name by A.K. Larkwood, and that's because I have been so excited about this book for months, well before I knew it was coming out. It was in my anticipated new releases video for 2020 that I filmed at the end of 2019. I've been following the author on Twitter. I even know there are people who have picked it up because I've talked about it, yet I still haven't read it, and I think it's partly because I have picked it up so much in my head. I've been so excited for this book that actually picking it up is a little bit nerve-wracking, and the simple reason that I'm so excited about this book is because it's about lesbian orcs. Like, that is it. It is a fantasy book, an adult fantasy book featuring a female-female romance, which is one of my favourite things in the world when it comes to literature, but also where the main characters are orcs, and I just think that that sounds like so much fun because orcs are obviously typically portrayed as the bad guy. They're quite like an old-fashioned baddie when it comes to fantasy literature, and I just love the idea that people are attempting to give these creatures and characters of traditional fantasy more nuance. I think it says something about the way fantasy's going and the new voices that are getting to be a part of fantasy, and I'm so intrigued to see a lesbian romance between two orcs. That I am so here for, yet still have not read. So when my books appear from London magically via the method of moving companies, I will be picking up the hardback, which is within that book collection. Similarly, we then have a new release that you're excited for coming out in the second half of the year, and again, I have tons. I even filmed, like I said already, an anticipated releases for 2020 in general, and then I filmed another one which was my anticipated releases for summer, and I already think I'll be filming one for autumn winter. So there's tons of books I'm excited about. But the one I think I will be reading next, and I'm probably the most excited for at the moment, is Cinderella is Dead by Kaylin Bayron, and this is a book that I cannot wait to arrive. It's also the book that my patrons and I picked to read in the coming months. So July, August, September, we're all going to be reading that book together over on my Patreon and sharing our thoughts on it, but it was one that I would have been reading straight away regardless. It is obviously inspired by the fairy tale of Cinderella, but it's actually set a few hundred years post the events of the fairy tale, exploring a world that has changed because of the events of the fairy tale. So now we live in a sort of dystopian society where young women are forced to attend these balls at a certain age in order to win a prince. And if they don't win a prince, they are never heard from again. And our protagonist is one of these teenage girls who's been sent to her first ball in order to win over a prince, but she's actually far more interested in other women than she is in men. So it's another female-female romance set in a fancy world that plays with traditional fairy tale tropes, and I'm so excited to see how it all comes together. I think it sounds brilliant, and I'm really looking forward to it. The next question is, what is your biggest disappointment? Now, there's been a few books I haven't actually loved this year. Some I DNF'd and others which just got stuck in the 2-star tier. But the one that probably disappointed me the most is The Winter King by C.L. Wilson. Now, the reason that this was a disappointment in particular, not just because it got 2 stars, is because I had really hyped up C.L. Wilson in my head. C.L. Wilson is a very well-loved fantasy romance writer, and her books are constantly being recommended to me on the basis of other books I've loved. She has written so many books, so if I had enjoyed this one, I would have had so many others to read, and I really thought it was going to be a perfect combination of those genres, a bit like I find Grace Draven, for example. However, I hated the romance in this book. I thought it was so unhealthy. I kept persevering and reading to the end because the world that C.L. Wilson created was stunning and intricate and intriguing, beautiful in terms of fantasy, but in the romance department, really disturbing and verging on non-consensual, and I could not root for the main romance, particularly the male character. Now, both the characters had their sort of like annoying characteristics, but the power dynamics were so unequal, and therefore it never fully felt like the woman was free, and then I could never fully root for their romance because of that. And then the way that he treated her and was constantly suspicious of her made me so uncomfortable. So although I thought I was going to discover a new favourite fantasy romance writer, I was really disappointed in the end, and I'm now kind of deterred from ever reading anything by C.L. Wilson again. On a more cheerful note, the next question is, what was your biggest surprise? And I think that this has to be Dread Nation by Justina Ireland, for the main reason that I never wanted to read this book because it was about zombies, and I was convinced that I hated zombie books. Like, absolutely convinced. However, if you actually saw a video I did a couple of weeks ago where I talked about books I loved within genres I hated, you'll know that I'm starting to question that attitude. That perhaps maybe I don't hate books with zombies in it, because this is actually the second book with zombies in it that I've loved, and I also have another book with zombies in it that I'm really excited to read. So I think I might be converted, and if not, there's definitely at least some zombie books out there that I'm going to enjoy, and this was one of them. I thought this book was fantastic. It is about a young black woman living in America in the 1800s, post the end of slavery, but in an alternative world where after the war, all of the dead rose up as zombies, and that changes the way that society has to function, because they have to protect themselves from the zombies, and the result is that the recently freed black citizens are trained as zombie hunters in order to protect the white citizens. And although it's an alternative history, it very much shines a light on the real inequalities and the real discrimination and the horrendous treatment of black people in America, both in the 1800s but also now. And I think it's an incredibly relevant book, despite both being fantastical and historical, and I loved it. I also loved it in great part because of the protagonist. Our protagonist is so sharp and clever and really just like knows how to make the most of a situation. People don't always expect great things for her, and she can sort of turn that to her advantage and thinks, I can do what I want and I can achieve what I want to achieve, and you're not going to stop me. And I loved her. She was brilliant, and I'm so excited to read book 2 in this series. There is also LGBTQ+ rep, there is asexual rep and bisexual rep so far, which is brilliant to see, and like I said, excited for book 2. The next question is, who is your favourite new author, whether it be new to you or just debut in general? And actually I was thinking, were there any authors who I discovered this year that I've subsequently read multiple books by, and there's not a ton unless I have continued to read the same series by them. It's not like the year I found Juliet Marillier for the first time and then read like 10 of her books in a row. However, there are authors that I had never read before this year that I have fallen in love with, even if I've yet to read more of their work. I'm very excited to. So one of those in particular is probably Mary Rose Wood. I've chosen to use her for this answer because I've read 3 books by her this year. They were all in the same series, but I've loved them all. They are part of the Incorrigible Children of Ashton Place series, which is a middle grade series set in 1800s England and follows a newly graduated governess who is sent off on her first real life job. She has been hired by a wealthy man and his wife to take care of their 3 children, or their 3 wards. They're not their biological children, they're actually 3 children that the lord of this manor house found in the woods and have, up until this date, presumably been raised by wolves. So she is sort of charged with making them civilized and teaching them Latin and how to use forks and knives whilst remaining in this household. And it is so charming, imaginative, mysterious, hilarious and creative, and I've just adored this series. It's one that I'm continuing to carry on with throughout the year, and it was one that I never expected to love as much as I did. So because of that, I also have my eye on some other Mary Rose Wood books to read in the future. I think she has some YA books, not just middle grade books, so I would like to try more by her, but at the moment I am focusing on that series. The first of which is called The Mysterious Howling. We then have the question, which is, what book made you cry? Like I've already mentioned, Inside This Place Not Of It definitely had me in tears. I don't know if a ton of other books have made me physically cry, because I'm not a big physical crier when it comes to literature. I more often cry in non-fiction than I do at fiction, and the only other book that I could say sort of brought me close to tears was probably Unicorn by Amru Al-Kadi, the memoir of a Muslim drag queen. Now this is Amru's autobiography. It's their journey growing up, moving around, eventually settling in the UK, their relationship with their family, discovering their sexuality and their gender identity, the rejection that they faced by the people they loved the most and were closest to, and then the really unhealthy, like destructive habits they picked up both because of that rejection and also just like homophobia and racism in wider society, and their journey of trying to find a way for all of the disparate parts of them to coexist in a way that others sort of tried to tear apart and prevent from coexisting, and they are able to sort of find a place for inside themselves and like make it all sort of work together. And the reason that I found myself almost crying when reading this book was particularly during the childhood and teenage portions of the narrative, where you learn a lot about Amru developing a lot of like OCD tendencies to cope with the rejection and discrimination they were facing. And it was so hard to read about. I'm so glad I read it, but it was so sad. Like, I felt so sad for this child, for this young person and everything they were going through, and it was an incredible journey to follow. And Amru seems like an incredible person from what I've now read about them, and I'm really glad I picked up that book, but it definitely kind of broke my heart in moments. We then have a book that made you happy. Now, tons of books made me happy this year. I've read a lot of really cheerful literature, but for this question I am just going to pull randomly out of my brain the Lumberjane series by Noelle Stevenson and Grace Ellis. This is another comic book series, did I already say that? Very possibly, but it's about a group of young girls, sort of like pre-teens, who are at a Girl Scout type camp over the summer called Lumberjanes, and there's 5 of them I believe, plus their camp counsellor, who end up on these completely riotous adventures throughout the sort of woodland surrounding their area. And I expected it to be quite contemporary, but it's actually weirdly paranormal and fantastical. Some really strange things happen to them when they're out on their adventures, and they end up embroiled in some sort of like paranormal fantastical mysteries that they have to solve, and it's brilliant. I love the relationship between the main girls. Their friendships, their bonds are so adorable and so lovely to read about. There was so much humour in this series that landed perfectly for me. The illustrations were stunning, and the plot was also a massive surprise. So I just ended up loving this comic book. I have read volumes 1 and 2, which are sort of one story arc in itself, and I'm really looking forward to carrying on with volume 3 because I know that too will probably make me excruciatingly happy. We then have what is the most beautiful book that you have bought or received this year. I'm actually just gonna like nip upstairs and grab it. Sorry, I should have been better prepared, but it has got to be this. If you saw my most recent Another Booktuber Picks My Book Haul video, you will know that I did a book haul swap with my friend Tasmin over at Tea Books and Tasmin, and one of the 3 books that she sent me was this, Chinese Fairy Tales and Legends by Richard Wilhelm and Frederick H. Martins, published by Bloomsbury. Now I got this very recently, so I haven't actually read it yet, but there are so many design elements to this book that I adore. First up, it's a naked hardback. Now, naked hardbacks I always think are some of the most beautiful books, and what I mean by that is a hardback where the cover is printed on the card itself as opposed to a dust jacket. We also have foiling. I mean, who does not love some beautiful gold foiling? Gorgeous use of fawn and borders, plus there's a dragon on the front, and we all know Jean loves a dragon, so the fact that there's this stunning collection of folk tales and fairy tales from China featuring a dragon, gold foiling and a naked hardcover has got to make this the most beautiful book that I have added to my collection this year. So thanks again to Tasmin for sending this one to me. The penultimate question is, what are some books that you need to read by the end of the year? And I wouldn't say I'm very much of a needs to read kind of reader. I want to read a lot of books by the end of the year, but I don't feel like I have to read specific books by the end of the year unless they are, say, for a book club. So the book that comes to mind is Angela Davis's autobiography, because it's the next read for Lauren and I's Feminist Orchestra Book Club, which is July, August. I will link the Feminist Orchestra Goodreads page down below, but that is the book that we had pre-picked for those 2 months, and I've been meaning to read this book for quite some time now. I've read 4 other books, I think, by Angela Davis, 3 or 4, and I love her. She is an incredible activist and writer and woman who I just like am in awe of constantly. Her work is phenomenal, and I've always meant to read her own autobiography. I think I picked my copy up last year, and then when we set it for the Feminist Orchestra, that felt like the perfect opportunity to finally read it and also be able to talk about other people with it. So that's one that I definitely need to read by the end of the year. But aside from that, and there's probably something I'm forgetting that you're going to correct me on, but I can't think of anything. And then last but not least is, who's your favourite book community member? Now, I obviously cannot pick one. Like, how could anyone pick one? We've all been spending most of our time on the internet given everything going on in the world. So I'm just going to link a list of people down below that I think you should 100% check out. So that's how we're going to do it, because otherwise I don't think I've got time to ramble on about everybody I love in this actual video. Those, however, are all the questions for the mid-year book freakout tag. I think I might be the last person to film this, but if I'm not, please take this as a bit of a push to get around and do it, because I really enjoy hearing people's answers to these questions. And if you don't film videos, then feel free to leave your answers in the comments down below. I would love to know what you would say for any of these questions. And until next time, happy reading. I'll see you all again soon. Bye guys!